What's up, y'all? I'm Holley Murchison, originally from New York City and now based in Winston-Salem. My purpose, I believe, is deeply rooted in helping as many people as possible self-actualize. I know that's a large term, but essentially it just means realize their full potentialities. So through my work, I wear a number of hats, from author to learning and development strategist to entrepreneur, where essentially I help multidisciplinary creators uncover, communicate, and champion their gifts, their talents, their personal narratives, and their ideas so they can actualize through, the root of the word first, communication. I do that through creating content, producing learning experiences, and coaching, teaching, and advising both independent creatives and enterprise teams.
Yeah, that's a lot of hats.
All in the name of like making sure that people are clear about what their purpose is and they're acting on their purpose, so that collectively we can make the world a better place, as corny as that sounds.
Yeah, no, it makes total sense to me. Before we get too far into everything, I want to ask just a really simple question. What is art, and what does it mean to be creative or a creative?
Oh, did you say a really simple question? I love that. I think art is the capacity to make something with your bare hands, to see an idea go from seed to fruit. I think what it means to be creative is to have the freedom to express yourself through whatever medium feels good, and to see that art, that work out in the world, healing and shaping futures.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right on. I mean, it is the idea that comes to fruition. Being multidisciplinary myself, I mean that I've done some woodworking, creating furniture, and then videos and audio, and it really is. It starts with that idea, and one of the things that I gather from your experience and the things that you do is there's an element of story, or how does one transition from that idea into actually putting something on paper or out into the wide world of the internet.
Yeah. I know we talk a lot about storytelling, and I think just like in its simplest form, communication, the idea to be able to take some kind of language and transfer it to someone else in a way that they can understand it and grasp it, and either like get on board and be on your team to make it happen, or like tell someone else. I think that's the core part of the work of storytelling, right? It's to transmit an idea. And I think at the very ground level of what we do, it's the foundational infrastructure. We can talk a lot about like, I need to upskill and learn how to like code or like to photograph, but it's like, if you don't have the language and the skill set to convey, what that art, the meaning behind that art or that creation, then a lot of times what we create is lost in translation.
Yeah, totally. I think developing some sort of formula or a process that can get that point across quickly is important. And that's you've done a lot of that in your writing in your book.
Yeah.
Um, Tell me about yourself. I mean, that book is, I don't know, I find it really fascinating because it's not only like an actual formula from start to finish, but I've picked it up a number of days where it's just I turn to one page and then it's like, oh, that's something I can implement right now.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, explain the process briefly. I don't want to. Well, I don't want you to give away everything, but just tell
Yeah.
tell me a little bit about the context of the book and how that started as an idea for yourself.
For sure. So, I mean, as a multidisciplinary entrepreneur like you, I've worked 20 jobs across 7 industries. So I essentially wrote Tell Me About Yourself because I got tired of fumbling and feeling insecure when people were like, what do you do? And I'm like, damn, it's not really what I do, it's why I do. And like, what is such a loaded question? Because I mean, on any given day, the what is probably like 7 different things. So you're like, I conceptualize ideas for shoots. I shoot the shoots. I edit the shoots. You know what I mean? I'm sure for you, it's a number of things. And I was super clear about my work's purpose, but I felt like communicating it on a whim felt unnecessarily complex. And instead of focusing on that what, I wanted to really get to the heart of why I do. And not just for the sake of like making connection with people and connecting meaningfully, but to also attract more aligned opportunities, right? Because what I was noticing was, you try and like make sense of what you do to a person and you see that like question mark on their face and they're like, oh, okay, that sounds cool. And then the conversation ends. Whereas I saw the difference that would happen when I could communicate to someone like, oh, I can teach you how to make clear what the work is that you're doing so that you can secure more leads, so that you can make more meaningful connections with folks, so that you can move the needle in your work. And it's like, oh, that sounds exciting. Like, teach me how. So the book was birthed from that desire to make it easy for people to really articulate what their true north is. And it's based on this 6-step method that I developed while I was researching and speaking and teaching around the world from like 2014 to 2017. So the book is structured as the 6-step method. And then there are interviews and case studies that help you unearth and articulate and champion the stories of your gifts, your talents, and your ideas with confidence and authenticity. So it's really an action guide for like, hey, you want to talk about what you do better? Here are some exercises that you can go through to do that. And it's not just like, oh, I can tell my story better in person, but it really is a book about self excavation and narrative development. It makes you ask the hard questions like, oh, what is my communication style? What are my insecurities around the way that I communicate? What are all the different spaces where I need to talk about who I am? Because sometimes it's a social media bio. Sometimes it's an interview when you're trying to introduce yourself to someone. Sometimes it's a friend who's like, yo, you need to talk to Sean. He's dope. And you're like, damn, how do I now how do I set myself up for success where you just been like, yo, he does it all. You need to rap with him. It's like, oh, for you, that's probably not useful because now you have to do a bit of a cleanup. So the book is
Right.
really designed to help people think through who's the audience you're talking to, how much time do you have, what do you really want to convey, what's a better question to respond to than tell me about yourself? And now, like, what are the pieces that you want to pull into that response based on your values and beliefs, your dreams and aspirations, your background and interests, and your skills and achievements?
Yeah. I mean, that it's like I said. I mean, it's a book that walks you through everything, and that to me was really helpful. And then also, like I said, I mean, I literally can pick it up on a daily basis and pinpoint on pretty much any page. Okay, this is something I need to work on today, and start to implement that and
Yeah.
practice that and work that skill to become better. You said it twice in the last thing you just explained, and it was insecurities.
Hmm.
And like, how does insecurities play into this element, and why is like personal brand important?
Oh, you said the word personal brand. I think it goes back to, right, like our K-12 learning experience. And my background is in education. Like I was teaching at the K-12 college level, taught adult education. And I was like, oh, there's so many adults in the world of work who weren't learning, like, we weren't in public speaking class in elementary school. And so there's a skill that goes this long stretch of time without getting honed, and then you're in the world of work and the expectation is that you're a good communicator, but you're like, shit, where do I learn how to communicate well? I mean, you learn it at home from your parents, but if your parents aren't good communicators, and for a lot of us that is the case, we don't come from backgrounds where historically our families are great at communicating around difference, around connection. And I think the insecurity develops there, and then you get put on the spot to do well at something that in private you've done poorly at for so long. And it's like, I don't want to say that I'm not good at this because it might affect my chances of moving forward if I admit that I'm not good at this. So I think the insecurity is kind of this mix of like shame of like, damn, I haven't learned this yet. I didn't realize I was going to get like tested on this. And then the other piece is like, oh, I'm such and such years old now, or I'm like this seasoned in my career. I should know how to do this better. And I think for like a lot of folks, there's a performance anxiety that comes up around that. It's like, I don't know how to talk about what I do. When the reality is, and I love that you said you pick up the book multiple times, is because we contain multitudes. We're changing rapidly. How I talked about what I do this week is drastically changed from like pre, COVID. So I think it's that that mental piece of like, I never learned this. I know I'm supposed to be good at it. We can't talk about the fact that I'm not.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, we're definitely being propelled very rapidly into new space, whether it be you just graduate from college and you're now like interviewing,
Yep.
and you may have had some prep in college or some, speaking class, but maybe not very specific on you, on, what it is that you
Yeah.
do. And then
Yeah.
there's also the element of not really having the experience of like sharing a story or being, confident in that. One of the things that I do like about the book as well is that along with the steps, there's practice moments so that you're able to
Yeah.
like put this stuff into to practice. And the only way we get good at it is by practicing.
Yeah, for sure. There has to be a practice component around it.
Yeah. And the other thing too, like right now, is that everybody's engaging on a different level. I mean, especially now, some businesses, like Twitter and Facebook and Google and other companies in that same scope are not going back. I mean, they're permanently allowing employees to work from home, which
Yeah.
now our interpersonal skills will be even less personal because now we're only looking at people on a screen when we're talking business or we're talking, presenting ideas.
It's a really interesting landscape change that like makes you think, oh, this is a skill set that we should probably start investing in like now. And I mean like investing in terms of like putting dollars behind in companies in terms of learning and development for their teams. I mean investing in on an interpersonal level as peers. It's like it is the core of the work that we do. I'm sure for you, securing a lead is like, can you communicate from like introduction point to the close of the actual deal to like the communication across the project? It is
Hmm.
literally the heart of everything we do. And it seems simple on the surface. You're like, yeah, duh, of course. But the practice of it, theory and practice are two completely different things.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and then skill levels. I'm originally from Minnesota, and so
Mhm.
my general email writing policy is to write two paragraphs about what I'm trying to ask, but not actually ask. And then my girlfriend is from New York City, and she'll write one or two sentences asking exactly what that is. So that's interpreted in two different ways as well as communicating. So it's a
Yeah,
balance too.
it's a very delicate balance. And I love that you bring that point up because it just reinforces, right, that that's a tell me about yourself moment. To introduce yourself in an email and invite someone like on your podcast or whatever the conversation is, right? Like that might be a two paragraph thing for you. But if you think about like the context of in-person meeting, like two paragraphs in an in-person conversation is probably like a long time to be like talking to someone. It's almost like talking at them. So that
Yeah.
like those just cultural nuances and differences are super important to take into consideration. So
Yeah, yeah, totally. Um, you've done quite a bit of speaking as well. How is, the concept of presenting your vision or your story
mm,
in a bullet point or like an elevator speech, so to speak? How does that differ from public engagement when you've got a wide range of people in front of you?
yeah, I mean, it is obviously different just based on like the time constraints alone. Like a 45-minute keynote is much different than like I have a paragraph in this email to get a point across or like in this caption. But I try to treat everything like a conversation. Even when I'm giving talks, I always need to have some kind of interaction with the audience. Like, you need to talk back to me. That we're going to do some exercises. It's going to feel like I'm walking you through the book in a real life conversation. You're going to talk to your neighbor because, oftentimes we go to conferences and it's very rare that we're communicating with the person sitting right next to us at the conference. So I do my best to initiate exercises and activities in my keynotes that feel interactive enough for people to be like, all right, neighbor, tell me about who you are. Like, tell me an exciting story about an experience that you've had. So the core differences for me is like time. I can do a lot more with 30 minutes than I can with a paragraph. But in the same vein, like I can make a paragraph as impactful as 30 minutes. And sometimes that like paragraph is what gets me to a stage where I have a larger amount of time. So for me, I try to keep it as conversational as possible.
Sure, sure. Yeah, I think that's. I've done a little bit of public speaking, and there's always you have to engage.
Yeah.
Just like when you're engaging in person, one on one, you have to have some sort of way to engage them. And I think that's, I mean, ultimately, that's kind of the context of the book, right? Where it's like you've bringing something to the table that's interesting and presenting yourself in an interesting way.
Yeah. And I think this another important piece to that too, Sean. It's like I think so many of us get hung up in the like, am I good enough? Do I have something of value to bring to the table when the table is an actual exchange, right? It's like, does the other person have something that I'm interested in engaging around? And I don't mean that in a transactional way of like, you give me something, I give you something, but it's like, are you a person I even want to talk to beyond the intro point, right? Because the intro you've read in the book is the appetizer, right? It's like, can I say something that entices you or that makes us feel connected enough that we want to engage in the rest of the meal together? Like, all right, appetizer, cool. Let's get to the entree. Let's get to dessert. This is the American way of dining, but it's like the intro is that moment to say, let me just give you a sample of, what might come from a larger conversation with me. So I think that's important to keep in mind too. It's interpersonal communication is, the process of communicating with two or more people.
Yeah, and I like what you said. I mean, you're not giving away the whole meal
Yeah.
because, like I feel like a lot of people do that. They'll like jump the gun and give as much information as they can, and then all of a sudden it's like, whoa, that's too much.
It's
I wasn't there yet.
overload.
Yeah. Um, I want to jump to like dreams and goals.
Sure.
And obviously this whole idea of presenting yourself and sharing your purpose and your passions is important, but kind of before you get to that, you also need to know where you want to go.
Yeah.
And what are some of the things that you do for goal setting? I mean, do you have, practices or things that you take 15 minutes to have a cup of coffee or a cup of tea and like map these things out? Or is there, do you have a kind of a method to the madness?
Yeah, definitely. I have a daily meditation practice. So like I spend a lot of time just in reflection. Because the normal pace of my life was constantly traveling about 150ish days a year. So I was like constantly like moving, and that reflective time to be like, wait, am I in alignment? What are the things that I really desire? Are those things in alignment with what like God has purposed me here to do? So that reflective time is critical. And to be completely honest, I'm really into astrology, and I know we don't have the time to get like very deeply in it. Um, but essentially, like having a copy of my birth chart has been a game changer for the ways in which I goal set and understand myself and set intentions for the work I want to do. And your birth chart is essentially this roadmap of where all of the planets, all of the aspects in the sky were at the exact moment that you were born. And it can tell you a very interesting story about what your potentialities are. So I study my chart to have a deeper understanding of like, what am I here to do? And I know like simply like some of my chart placements, like Mercury, for example, is a planet that rules communication. Mercury for me is in my sun sign of Virgo. And I know that for me, that means that placement means I am in a position to be a good communicator and a good teacher. So I'm like, oh, okay, that makes sense that I'm in a space where I teach and coach around communication. So for me, that's the way that I stay really aligned. And I also have good friends who see like my talents and potentials in me, and I bounce ideas off of them a lot. But my practice is really like to be meditative. I pray a lot, and I honestly am still as often as I can be, which is hard for me to listen for like intuitively. Does this feel right? Does this feel on? And then I dream big and plot and plan around it. But for me specifically, like for tell me about yourself, for example, I was just like, I need a methodology to introduce myself because this is getting crazy when people are like, what do you do? And I'm like, well, I'm an entrepreneur. I would just do like the one word thing. And the goal for Teammate was early on, like to create a tool that could be read and shared as many times as the book The Alchemist can be, or has been. Um, and I just started with that big seed of an idea, like, okay, and now what does that look like? How does that take shape over 3 years? And it's become, this larger ecosystem of tools, resources, learning experiences that are still like expanding.
Yeah, I mean, having an idea of where you want to go and what you need to do to get there is important. Like in the book, it's like, okay, well, I
Yeah,
want to communicate this stuff better. Let me follow these steps in
yeah,
order to build that. Just like, if goal setting, like I wanted to get a new studio, so it's like, yeah, I had to like plan and prep and think about what kind of space I wanted and what kind of work I wanted to do in there, and then really like have actionable steps to make that happen.
for sure.
um, that kind of, we touched on it a little bit, but one of the things that I'm working on and understanding more is the habit behind that.
Hmm.
Like you have a daily practice, like what are some things that are like, I have to do this in order to be aligned. And you said it earlier. I mean, that meditative practice um, is helpful, and I think a lot of people struggle with that.
Yeah. I mean, I think once I get past the meditative part too, there's like the writing it all out. And I'm a pen to paper kind of person. So when I take a big idea, I have to break it down in chunks. I'm like, okay, by the end of the year, I want to like have a foundation and a structure for a Tell Me About Yourself training program. I'm like, okay, that's by the end of the year. Then what am I doing? What are my quarterly goals around that end of year goal? What are my monthly goals around the quarterly goals for that end of year goal? And on a weekly basis, what am I doing to achieve that goal? So I see it like that way. Big goal broken down into small chunks. And the planning process is a lot easier when I do it that way. So that I'm just like, how am I spending my time? And if I can look at the end of the week and I'm like, oh, I didn't do anything toward this monthly goal that's tied to this quarterly goal, that's tied to this annual goal, then I have to reset and reconsider and renegotiate boundaries around time, and boundaries around like what my day to day looks like.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I mean, you've kind of already explained this next question, but I
Yeah.
want to see if there's anything outside of, um, you know, sharing your story and communicating.
Mhm.
But have you ever been in a situation where you found yourself unprepared? And
Oh yeah,
then what fix did you put in place to prepare yourself for the next opportunity?
man, I was unprepared for COVID, to be completely honest, and I think a lot of us were like, we had planned, right? Because the goal around Tell Me About Yourself, we had planned out this entire tour for the summer. We had just locked in a partner. They finalized the budget number they were going to give us. We're like, all right, June, July, August, we're going to visit these three cities. And then we got news of that COVID was actually a thing we should be paying attention to, that was a global pandemic spreading. And the company we were going to partner with got their partnership budget pulled, and we were at zero. And so it was like, oh, wow, this was like, we had planned for months to do this thing this summer. And it was like, oh, okay. Like there was nothing had crossed our mind of like, if this doesn't work out, like what will we do instead? And so that was a huge moment of like, all right, that's not happening. So, what do we do now? And it was I'm trying hard not to use the word pivot because I know that's like the word of the day these
The
days.
hashtag.
It's hashtag pivot everything. But it was really like, okay, as an entrepreneur, when I think the best skill an entrepreneur can have is ingenuity, it's like, what are you gonna do now? And I just paused. I was like, I'm not going to be reactive. I'm just going to take this as a sign that now is a good moment to just unplug from work and just be still. And in that moment of stillness, I was able to just think through some stuff. We had talked about doing more digital things around Tell Me About Yourself. And one of my core values is tactility. I'm like, I need to be able to touch, feel, see it, have people come into an experience. And I'm like, you don't have that in person anymore. So now it became a little bit more urgent to rethink what a digital version of teaching people the teammate method could look like. And we were like, we plan to do that in 2021. But I guess now is the time to rethink it. So we just responded that way, like, okay, we weren't prepared for this to happen, but there is still something we can do. So let's start making moves to create a digital environment ecosystem, which actually we were primed to do because the method has reached 200,000 people around the world, but we didn't have a way of connecting those folks. So we're like, okay, now let's think about like what it looks like to connect people online. So we're still figuring out the moving parts of it and planning for some things in early fall. But um yeah, that was the biggest moment of like, oh, I didn't see that coming at all. Like I had no idea that that was how it was going to play out. But here we are.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, similar situation for me. I basically just moved into the studio. So February, Lexi and I went to Colombia, and then we came back. And all of March, I was planning on building out the studio and getting everything set up, podcast suite, all the backgrounds, like basically ready to function. And then everything happened. And so, like I could have gone down there and done some work, and I probably should have, but I also, like you, was like, you know what, I'm going to take a little time to like figure out, what's important to me, and then, slowly move back in that direction. And,
Yeah.
some of that doesn't necessarily work anymore. I don't necessarily want to do some of the stuff I had originally planned to do, which is, I think, a natural part of a slowdown, or taking time to think about what you
Yeah.
actually want to do rather than just getting caught up in that grind. Um,
Yeah. I love that you called it a slowdown because I think it's something that as entrepreneurs we can often take for granted. Like it's like a flag on the play if you're slowing down, but it's like, no, no, no. Those slow down moments give us an opportunity to catch up to ourselves and be like, wait, what am I doing here? Am I just like a hamster on a wheel right now? Or is this like really the thing that makes the most sense? And that was what I learned in the COVID moment. It was like, oh, wait, let me really pause. If we're in a global pandemic and this is really a moment where the universe and nature and all the elements are like, hey, humans, get your shit together. So we can really, honor what we have available to us in terms of resources. I'm like, oh, I want to be as purposeful as possible about this, and it helped me see Team A in a new light. I was like, oh, this could be crazy useful to creators who are trying to figure out how do they position their skills and their gifts and their talents in a new way, in a new, in an economy that's reshaping itself. So yeah, the slowdown is critical. That's a good moment. I know it's also terrifying, and there are a lot of like socioeconomic pieces around it. And
mhm.
I'm just excited for the rise of the creator to really be like, oh wait, we can do something different. This economy relies heavily on our gifts and our talents and our skills. If we rethink and like pull together to think about what the new can look like, um, the future is exceptionally bright if we do the work.
Yeah. I mean, it does bring up, a little bit of self doubt and that whole concept around imposter syndrome, uh,
Hmm.
because now we're venturing into new space, and that's partly, why like a book like yours is so valuable, because it allows us to do the work to get to where we want to be confident.
Yeah.
How have you struggled with imposter syndrome, and how did you overcome that?
And writing this book, I was like, there was so many points in writing this book where I was like, this is so simple. Like if people really wanted to know this, they could just like Google it and figure it out. Like, why is this perspective really necessary? Like, am I moving the needle on a thing? And that like there was writing the book was a really emotional process because I had to go through the method myself. I was like, but no, but this really works. Like, yes, it's simple and that's a good thing. Like, and it just helped me come to that moment of like, if a thing is simple or comes naturally to you, it is likely one of your gifts. And that's not a bad thing. That's a great thing because there's an ease that comes to you to be able to transfer that information to other people. And I've taught this to like thousands of people and it is simple, but I've seen how transformational it is for a person. Right? Like when you think about basketball, like a layup is simple, but like a lot of points in a game are scored through a layup. So when I started to think about it through the lens of like what's simple to me can be valuable to other people, that was a game changer. And there's also something that a guy named Clay Hebert said to me years ago. He was like, people don't pay you for the information, they're paying for the way you curate it. And I started to think about the space of communication and self development and what it looks like. And there's a lot of like essentially white older men who are the authorities on these topics. And I was like, oh, wait, my lived experiences as a Black queer woman from like New York City, having been and built this career from, coming from a background that I did, is like, oh, no, 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 no. There's a lot of value in that. And there are a lot of people who look like me or who relate to experiences like mine who are going to connect with that information, right? Like everybody doesn't get their information from the same source. So I was like, oh, I can be a source. I'm being called to be a source for this information. This is my duty. And that really helped get over the imposter stuff because I'm like, I know this. I've been practicing this since debate team in high school, since being the captain of my basketball team. Like my life experiences have been grooming me for this work. And when I really took a moment to reflect on that, I was like, oh, there's no imposter here. I'm being real about it. I'm real about the fact that there are still areas where I'm growing and still I can teach people from where I am.
Yeah, I mean exactly right, because we are experts at our life,
That's
and there's
it.
other people like us. And one of the things that really stands out to your drive is um, like your experience and how valuable that experience is, and kind
Mhm.
of like the goal set or the mindset of empowering marginalized people.
Yeah.
And like that resonates with me because like we're all in this thing together, and we all need the insight. And I think your perspective of the sources have been older white males,
Mhm.
and nobody, I mean, not nobody, but a lot of people don't resonate with that. They may
Yeah.
have animosity towards that. And so your perspective is highly valuable. You also speak of a shift coming, and I would like to get a little
Mhm.
understanding of kind of like what you feel is coming, and why it's important, and how it's going to benefit everybody.
Yeah. I mean, specifically speaking to like data and the numbers, we know that by the year 2040, people of color will be in the majority, right? So this whole language of like, we're a minority, it's like, no, 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 the numbers will shift. And when I think about it, I'm like, oh, if we are not all equipped with the basic skill sets, like socio emotional skills development, language, communication, creativity, if the people who are the majority of our population are not equipped in that way, then collectively we're going to be screwed, right? So when we think about that shift of not just people of color, and I'm talking Black, Latinx, Indigenous people being in the majority, I'm also talking about other historically marginalized people, women, people who identify as LGBTQI communities, and also creative communities. When we think about the numbers of how much we contribute to economies, we are driving and powering a lot of economies. And there's a certain set of skills that we need to develop when we think about like, can we communicate well? Can we negotiate on our own behalf? Are we investing in our personal and professional development? And when I say personal development, I mean mental, physical, emotional well being. If so, the shift that is coming with our numbers as they increase, the economic power that we have, it's like, oh, we're in a really, really good position for creatives to drive the future. I think that's the shift that I speak of. And when we see what's happening with COVID and we see just in pockets in different communities, how creatives have been able to band together to make things happen, you're like, oh yeah, we're really onto something. There's a communal actualization piece that happens when we individually invest in our own, self-development. That's what I'm super excited about. And when I say creatives, I mean across all of the different art spectrums, right? You've got food, you've got music, you've got museums, you've got like film and TV and multimedia. So I think that's always been like the pulse of culture. And
Mhm.
it's like history repeats itself. So I'm hoping for a positive resurgence around that, like a new renaissance.
Yeah, I'm super excited. I mean, on a side note, even like having the movie Love Jones on Netflix is like, that's groundbreaking to me. But I think like as a company or a major organization that's hiring, I know that in the past 5 years there's been a couple of fiascos where things were done. I don't know how to say it, but like you could tell that there wasn't um, somebody in these marginalized groups on
Mhm.
their creative team. You can just tell by the way
Yeah.
things were said and spoken, and how important is it for creative companies or major corporations to actually have different perspectives on their team.
Oh, it's tremendous. It's the lifeblood of business, right? And I think where some people misunderstand it is like you're saying have a black woman for the sake of having a black woman, or you're saying have a black man like just to say we have a. And it's not a numbers game. It is literally like an experience and a perspective game, right? And when you're thinking about as a creative company, if the audience you're saying you're serving is like all people or like all types of people, then it's almost impossible for you to honestly say that you're creating something for the good of all people when the voices of all of the people you say you represent are not reflected at the table. It's just like simple math, right? It's like, I'm gonna make this meal from this cuisine that I've never tried before from a country I've never visited. But me and all these people who've never been there and never done it before, we're just gonna figure it out from scratch. Like, no, you're probably not. Like, and you're probably gonna butcher it and you're probably gonna fail a lot until you actually invite in the expertise of people who have lived that experience, right? And I don't think it's just like the lived experience. I think it's like intellectual experience, it's cultural experience. There's all of the nuances that come with the a lived experience that are missing from the table for a lot of companies who are missing the mark. And I think ultimately it doesn't hurt them. They don't see the hurt of it like immediately because we're a culture that quickly forgets things, but it's going to add up. It's going to
Mhm.
add up. And someone who does care and does do it better will ultimately phase these folks out, which is right that resurgence of creative that can usher in a new wave of things.
Yeah, and I think some of that's already happening,
Oh,
especially now because I mean with COVID, but then even prior to that, I mean people are choosing where they do business or choosing what products they buy based on like the mindset of the company or what's being projected. You
absolutely.
know,
Absolutely. The mindset and the communication, right? Because I know you mentioned storytelling in the beginning and it's just sitting in my head now, right? Like storytelling is deeply tied to belonging. When people can see themselves in a narrative that's being created, they know, oh, this is a thing that is for me. Like you actually care about me. And I think just from a values aligned perspective, that's something that every human wants. They want to belong.
yeah. Um, One of the things that I really like too about everything that you're doing is it helps people prepare to communicate, their values and their story, so that they can get into these bigger companies. How important is this concept into like an interview space or applying for jobs?
Yeah, I would pause because I would say there was a part of me that was like, get into the bigger companies. Like, no, I think it's part of that if it's your desire,
Mhm.
or wherever you're interviewing for, or if you're like starting your own thing, um, it's hugely important. That's one of the biggest. An interview, the entire interview process is one big like teammate or like tell me about yourself conversation, and most people want to know. Um, Prove to me that you're a good fit for this environment here. Prove to me that you can add some, using your word, value to this space. Prove to me that you have the skills or the tenacity or the desire to like add to something here. Prove to me that you can help make this thing better. Um, and I think, again, it being like a two-way conversation, often we go into interviews thinking, I got to show myself, I have to be the best. I want them to like me. But it's also like, is this a good fit for you? So it's a
That's
dual opportunity to be like, yeah, sure. Here are my skills. Here are the things I'm interested in. Tell me more about the work you all are doing here. Awesome. Like you said, you have, some really diverse teams. Can you share one of your favorite projects that a diverse set of employees from the company have worked on? I would love to hear more about that, right? Because
Mhm.
a lot of times, I mean, in my own experience, in the 20 plus jobs I worked, I would know by the 6th month I would actually honestly know by the first week, like if that was the place for me, if I made the right decision. But it made
Mhm.
me wiser around the interview process. Like, oh shit, next time I'm gonna ask this question up front.
Yeah.
So it's hugely important. That's the courting phase of like, do I want to date this company? Do I
Mhm.
want this company to be my bae?
Yeah. No, I mean that one of my proudest moments of Lexi is she was interviewing at this agency and she came in and there was maybe 6 or 10 people. I don't know exactly how many, but the creative director came in and like wouldn't make eye contact, wouldn't speak to her, like totally like wrote her off. And it was a terrible experience. She felt so like disgruntled by it. And then the hiring manager, which I think was above that person, asked her
Mhm.
to come in for a conversation. And the reason I was so proud is because she told them point blank, like, I like the work that you do. I like some of the people, but the fact that the culture at your company is allowed to act that way, I
Mhm.
will never work it. Like she literally was able to voice her real feelings and real opinion, and not too many people do that.
That's
And
so important.
it is important because if she felt like that on the first day, and like what would that have been, the fact that they allow the culture to be that way,
Mhm.
um, it's really alarming that a company would do that.
And I'm sure that's not the only one. I love that that is very New York of her
Yeah.
to speak up on that point. But it also like kudos to her because hopefully that company took that insight and added it into their like process. Like, yo, here's what we need to shape up in this area.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that they let that guy go. I mean, there had been a number of experiences, but I think, by her actually voicing her true opinion,
Hmm.
um, and it was just an interview process. But the fact that she was just like, "Look, your culture is messed up. Like, you're not going to be able to continue to go." And I think a lot of people know that there is this new wave coming, and so I think that they, wisened up a little bit. But yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I think, like you said, it's a relationship. Like if this thing doesn't
It,
work for me, if I'm not going to feel comfortable and safe here, then I can't be here.
that's it. That's
Yeah.
it. And I know that's can be a challenging thing to say for folks when they're like, I need to put food on the table. So I understand the necessity for folks to, or the need for folks to have to make that choice and make that sacrifice sometimes. And I hope we can all get to a place where it's a sacrifice worth making, regardless. Like,
Mhm.
nah, I'm not gonna compromise the alignment of my values for a check. It's a lot of pain in the long run and in the short run sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, nobody wants to feel that way when they're working or when they're, trying to give their best effort. And um, I think she said something the other day that just really, really hit me too. And this was another conversation she had. It was something about, the importance of, and I don't remember exactly how she said it, but the importance of like mental safety or like psychological safety.
Psychological safety. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's deep, man. It's deep. It's one of the things that I actually want to start studying more around because it's like this notion that like you can say, yes, you're safe here. The culture is safe for you to tell us how you feel. But if the moment someone tells you how they feel, you're like tackling them and telling them why they can't say things like that and how they're misunderstanding, right? Like that's not a psychologically safe workplace. And that's something that a lot of businesses and companies hopefully make some shifts around. I think this remote environment too is going to reveal a lot of how psychologically unsafe workplaces are. I was
Mhm.
reading like some Twitter threads about how supervisors and management folks have been like helicopter parenting over
Mhm.
like employees, like you need to be at the computer at this time, you if you log off Zoom, like you can't. And it's like, nah, that's not that's not the wave at all. Like people, there is life happening outside of work.
Yeah.
And I appreciate so much that this COVID moment is helping people focus in on like, oh wow, we allow work to consume so much of our lives at the expense of like health,
Mhm.
emotional stability, like psychological wellness, family time. And now it's like, nah, that's not. It makes me think about like the work that I'm doing in this time is also not so much so people can be prepared to go into corporate work environments, but it's really so that people can advocate for their own authenticity, not just in the
Mhm.
world of work, but beyond that, and decide like, here is the value that I bring. Here is who I am. Here is what I care about. Here are the types of things that I want to do. Like, where are the spaces that I can find and create for myself where I can do that, where I can be fully and freely, like creatively self expressed, whether that's within a company or like working collaboratively with peers. And that's really the core of it. It's like, as I change across time and seasons, can I continue to advocate for my story, for my gifts, for my talents, for my needs, and champion those things in the world of work as it evolves? And like as such, be a person who is helping to shape a better future for work that, surpasses this outdated mode of things that we have. Like you can't clock people full time, like not in a remote environment, not in like
Mhm.
real time. Like that's just not where we are.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I agree. Well, listen, I want to try to keep these to a like a condensed thing
We're at
for
like an
multiple
hour now.
things. Yeah. But I really want to just thank you for your time and your insight. For the viewers and the listeners, if you can just share how they can get in contact with you if they want to look into to bringing you on to help them, to
Yeah.
coach them.
You can find me on Instagram at Holley M Murchison. That is the social media platform that I'm most active on. And you can visit my personal website, hollymurchison.com. You can get a clear lens on how we can work together for coaching, how you can buy a copy of my book, or how you can partner more largely to collaborate with my communication studio, Oratory Glory.
Fantastic. Thanks again, Holly. And I
Thank
will
you.
definitely put the information in the show notes so
Cool.
people can find you that way as well. Again, just thanks for your time and your insight,
Thank you.
and for your book. I mean, it definitely has helped me, and I hope that others out there will pick up a copy and go through the process. It's fantastic.
Thank you. I'm glad it's been useful for you.